between 1985 and 2020, a time frame that I was partially alive for, if you had stolen a vehicle in Maine or New York, and you can hold off on the next slide, Blessing, just keep, oh no, go back. If you had stolen a vehicle in Maine or New York, your name was most certainly Thomas or Corey. Okay, Thomas's were the main carjackers, and New York was dominated by the Coreys. Okay, and if you don't believe me, now you can throw up that slide. I've got the proof. See, the popularity of the first name Thomas in the U.S. correlates with the number of motor vehicles thefts in Maine. So obviously, Thomas was stealing the vehicles in Maine. And Corey was stealing the vehicles in New York. All the Coreys. Right? And thankfully, as you can see though, parents smartened up over time and stopped naming their kids Thomas and Corey. And so the motor vehicle thefts fell in those two states. And we got some other interesting facts for you here. The more butter that Americans eat, the more wind power Lithuania generates. So if you want Lithuania to have more power, more wind power that is, we need Americans to eat more butter. Okay? South Californians seem to have pretty good and also maybe not so good vision because they have the ability from South California to see successful Mount Everest climbers. Unfortunately, they're also mistaking them for UFOs. So UFO sightings in California correlates with the number of successful Mount Everest climbs. Here's perhaps a more concerning one. American law enforcement graduates keep looking up, keep Googling sleepwalking. Okay? So the amount of degrees awarded in law enforcement in the U.S. correlates with number of searches for sleepwalking. That's maybe not a good thing. Every now and again, I come across these graphs, and I appreciate that someone took the time to put these random information, these stats together. According to the website I pulled these graphs from, TylerVegan.com, he apparently started doing this back in 2015, and now has a little help from AI to power his website to pull more ridiculous correlations. True stats that combined into graphs, you can make it look like they connect. And if this is not the best use of AI, then I don't know what is. As we continue our series on humans and AI, while we must admit AI is quite impressive, helping make these graphs, right? And seems to be improving by the day, we need not worry that it will replace your value. While it has the ability to compile data, it is lacking when it comes to truth and wisdom. And that's what we're going to look at this morning. AI can process information, but it can never replace humanity's God-given role as bearers of truth and wisdom. And we're gonna start with maybe an easy one, because if you've ever used any of the popular AI chatbots or AI functions, you know that AI is very fallible. AI makes lots of mistakes. It can do some pretty impressive things, but it makes lots of mistakes. It only knows as much as we tell it or give it access to, and even then, it gets things wrong. And this is for anybody that is in school and tempted to use AI to just generate your assignments. Back in October, the BBC did a study in coordination by with the European Broadcast Union, and they wrote the intensive international study of unprecedented scope and scale was launched at the EDU News Assembly in Naples, involving 22 public service media organizations in 18 countries working in 14 languages. It identified multiple systemic issues across 4 leading AI tools. So this study was done. It was focused on how AI interprets news stories. So you could argue that perhaps they might have a motive to discredit AI because, I mean, they want to keep their jobs. But enough people were involved in this, and the key findings that they had when seeing how AI handled news stories. So if you were to use one of the popular AI chat things and say, like, give me the daily news or something, be careful. They found that 45% of all AI answers had at least one significant issue. 31% of responses showed serious sourcing problems, missing, misleading, or incorrect attribution. 20% contained major accuracy issues, including hallucinated details and outdated information. According to them, Gemini performed worse with significant issues in 76% of responses, more than double the other assistants, largely due to poor sourcing performance. So this was the largest study of its kind, and found that AI was not as reliable as many people hope it is, and sometimes use it as being. And you have perhaps come across some wrong things if you've used it. I know I have, and been like, that's not right. And now you'd be right in pointing out, be like, okay, how does this affect humanity? Because, I mean, how many of you are fallible? How many of you make mistakes? If all your hands aren't up. But again, it comes down to the connection that we have or can have with the source. A connection that AI can never have. Deuteronomy 32 verses 3 to 4 says, I will proclaim the name of the Lord. Oh, praise the greatness of our God. He is the rock. His works are perfect, and all his ways are just. A faithful God who does no wrong, upright and just is he. When it comes to truth, God doesn't make mistakes. Jesus himself claimed, and of course a shocking statement, both then and now, not just to know truth, but to be the embodiment of truth, saying that I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And a man that did all that Jesus did should not be so readily dismissed. Before his crucifixion, as Jesus was on trial, the topic of truth before Pilate came up. The Roman official in charge of the area had Jesus on trial. And John 18, verses 36 to 38 says, Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leader. But now my kingdom is from another place. You are a king then, said Pilate. Jesus answered, you say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. What a statement. What a truth. What is truth? Retorted Pilate. With this he went out again to the Jews gathered there and said, I find no basis for a charge against him. Now, of course, if you know what happens, Pilate says, I find no basis for a charge against him, and yet Jesus is taken and crucified nonetheless. Jesus says that very bold claim, everyone on the side of truth listens to Jesus, listens to him. According to Jesus, you and I can choose to be on the side of truth by listening to him. You know, that's something that AI can't do. Sure, it has access to the written word of Scripture. It could even record Jesus' voice and process it if Jesus was to speak audibly today. However, it cannot listen to Jesus in the fullest sense of the meaning. To hear and embrace, to take to heart, and to live out what Jesus says. See, that's something for you and me to do. I find it a bit funny, and if you could say such things in such a weighty moment, that Pilate went from what is truth, saying that, to, in a sense, saying there is no truth in the accusations against you. But his question is a good one. What is truth? In fact, the idea of truth has, our humanity's understanding of truth has kind of taken on different understanding over time, and part of that's with the scientific revolution and how we look at the way things are. And I think it's fair to say that in our day, truth is a bit of a battleground between sides that are arguing different dimensions of truth. On one side, you have the facts. This is empirically consistent, data proven, it's true. On the other side, there are what feels authentic, something reflecting inner experience and personal meaning. It's true to me. And while we can seek to champion one of these frameworks of truth, as a follower of Jesus, we are not called to pick one of those sides, but to take Jesus' side. If we look into how Jesus handled truth, we see that he acknowledged both sides. What people felt and experienced. And what, no matter what people thought or felt, was the fact. And if we look into the Hebrew words from the Jewish scripture that Jesus read and affirmed, we find a deeper understanding of what truth is. Let's take Deuteronomy 32, verse 4, for example, which I read earlier. I read it from the NIV. He is the rock, his works are perfect, and all his ways are just. A faithful God who does no wrong, upright and just is he. Now, if I had read it from the King James Version, whether the Authorized or the 1900, they both say the same thing. It says, he is the rock, his work is perfect, for all his ways are judgment. A God of truth, and without iniquity, just and right is he. See, one says faithful, one says true. Now that's because the word being translated speaks of more than a than just factual truth or felt truth, but it speaks of reliability, stability, and faithfulness. See, this God, our God, is the true God because he is reliable, he is faithful, he is steady, even if everything else would give way. The Greek word used when Jesus says he is truth to Pilate, aletheia, speaks of a non-deception and reality, that which is reliable. See, the truth Jesus isn't strictly facts, though the historic fact of his life, death, resurrection, and teaching is absolutely right. Jesus' truth isn't based on what feels true to us, though the Holy Spirit is at work confirming and giving us peace about what is true. The truth Jesus goes beyond that and is firm, reliable, and a revelation of what really is. See, when the facts seem fuzzy, Jesus remains reliable. When feelings fade, Jesus remains reliable. Jesus remains true. And we have been given this unique opportunity to lean upon this steady, this trustworthy, this faithful, true God. To ground ourselves in the unshakable truth of who Jesus is. That's something that AI can never do. We, unfortunately, can replace our reliance on God with a dependence on something else, which includes AI. And when we do that, we are allowed to, and we can see what becomes of that. But it will never be truly true, reliable, and it can never replace God or the position he has given. And this is where we begin to see the transition to wisdom and see how it dances in harmony with truth. See, with wisdom helps us understand truth. You know, things can be factually true, but not necessarily reliable to us. Kind of like those graphs I showed you. The stats on them were, to my knowledge, true. They had sources. But what they were pointing to was not reliably true. Here's an example in Job. We can read Job chapter 4, verse 17 to 21. It says, "Can a mortal be more righteous than God? Can even a strong man be more pure than his maker? If God places no trust in his servants, if he charges his angels with error, how much more those who live in houses of clay, whose foundations are in the dust, who are crushed more readily than a moth? Between dawn and dusk, they are broken to pieces. Unnoticed, they perish forever. Are not the cords of their tent pulled up so that they die without wisdom?" Let's be honest. This sounds and rings with true. It sounds wise and rings with truth. I mean, nobody can be more righteous than God. Right? I think we all agree on that. But what are we in comparison to him? But these are words from Eliphaz to Job. And they contain, yes, some factual truth, and yet God responds, when he does, not to praise Eliphaz for his keen insight, but he says this in Job 42, verse 7. After the Lord has said these things to Job, he said to Eliphaz the Temanite, I am angry with you and your two friends because you have not spoken the truth about me, as my servant Job has. Now, that's not saying that God is not more righteous than we. And there was a lot that Eliphaz and his friends spoke. And if you read through Job, which I encourage you to do so if you've never done before, even if you have, you could read through it and read what Eliphaz and his friends say and think, this is some good stuff. They say some stuff that, it sounds so good. Yet even when the words were factually true, together, and in the situation with Job, they weren't reliably true. They were pointing to something that wasn't true. And they at times do say specific things that God had already revealed to be. They say things that are not true, that God had revealed to the other way. You know, you could even look in Genesis 3 to the words of the serpent to Eve. And you could argue that the serpent wasn't necessarily telling untruth. You could argue that his words were true in a way, as it deceived Adam and Eve. But the questions and half-truths from the serpent were deeply unreliable. Deeply unreliable. See, wisdom is more than just knowledge, but is more of a life-giving way of applying knowledge. The ancient Jewish king Solomon wrote in Proverbs 4:7, the beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom, though it costs all you have, get understanding. I love that. The start of wisdom, get wisdom. Okay, what do you mean? The start of wisdom is get wisdom. You know, you are at the starting point to be wise when you pursue wisdom. And apparently it's worth all you have. Proverbs chapter 8, verses 10 to 11 says, choose my instruction instead of silver, knowledge rather than choice gold. For wisdom is more precious than rubies, and nothing you desire can compare with her. Now, we can disagree and have arguments over what is truly wise or even reliably wise. I think it's fair to say that generally people think wisdom is good to have. I think generally, even if we disagree on what wisdom looks like in different scenarios, most people agree that wisdom is good to have. Now, while we often think that we are wiser than we are, most people value at the very least the idea of wisdom. I think it's fair to say, too, that most people think they're wiser than the average person, which the math doesn't work out. I think we can all agree as well, though, at least on some level, that wisdom is attainable for people. We can get wise. We can get wisdom. Is that fair to say? You and I have the ability to be wise. Proverbs 19:11 says, a person's wisdom yields patience. It is to one's glory to overlook an offense. The author, traditionally ascribed to Solomon, King Solomon, he ascribes wisdom to a person's wisdom. And it then brings about patience and forgiveness. You know what AI isn't? AI isn't and cannot be wise. We are called to be wise. AI can't be wise. You know what? Just for fun, I asked both ChatGPT and Gemini, are you wise? And here are bits of the response. ChatGPT's response was, a fair answer is knowledgeable, yes. Good at reasoning, usually. Infallible, no. Wise like a thoughtful human elder, not really. But I can help you think through questions in a way that may feel wise. Thought that was interesting. Gemini's response was, wise might be a bit of a stretch. True wisdom, that usually requires lived experience, empathy, a bit of scar tissue, and the context of a real human life. I don't have those. I have the data, but you have the context. So I'll bring the information and the logic. If we team that up with your judgment and intuition, we can usually come up with something pretty wise together. I thought that was interesting. You and me, we'll team up. We'll do something wise together. Now, I can agree with its responses. They cannot be wise. And in fact, the way Gemini processed the question and information points out that it would have to lean on me or humanity to arrive at something seemingly wise. Now, to go along with last week, the image of the divine with which we were created is revealed in part through our ability to be wise. You know what everyone loves about AI for the most part? We can tell it what to do, and it will do it. Just like that. Or maybe a little longer, depending on the processing. But we can tell it what to do, and it will do it. It gives us quick responses, creates fast images and videos. And as it gets integrated with other systems, we'll be able to make things and do things faster and faster and faster. It makes it so we need to have less and less patience. Which, I'll remind you, is a product of wisdom. You know what we don't always like about God? What we don't always like about Jesus? He doesn't fully bend to our wants. Sure, he loves us, absolutely. And he loves providing what we truly need. But we don't just input a prayer and he spits out the response, the result that we want. That's why it's so attractive to just put all our questions, all of our, give me the answer into the chat box. And it can spit out an answer based on all the data it has. And why can't God? You know, I think the creator of the world knows us a little better than the chat box. Jesus, when confronted with people he couldn't please, people he wouldn't please, he said this, Matthew chapter 11, verse 16 to 19. To what can I compare this generation? They are like children sitting in the marketplaces and calling out to others. We played the pipe for you. You did not dance. We sang a dirge and you did not mourn. For John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say he has a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, here is a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. But wisdom is proved right by her deeds. People that accused Jesus of not being all that they thought he should be. John of not being all that they thought he should be. It's not what you want. True wisdom is not bending to whatever is out. It is shaped by what is reliable, what is true. Proved to be truly wise. Jesus modeled living out his wisdom perfectly. All that he did. You and I are called to follow in living out godly, having it proved like what? There is no substitute for it. There is no task. This is not a task that we can delegate to artificial intelligence. And the reality is, if we try and pass it off too much, wisdom points to the fact that we will weaken our ability to live life. If we allow AI to replace our mind, they will act for it. Use it or lose it. We're already seeing this. Probably should have looked into some educational stats with the rise of different tools and stuff. But you can look into it. Think about it. How many of you remember a bunch of phone numbers? How many of you used to remember a lot of phone numbers? Growing up, I knew my friend's number, knew my home number, knew like all these different numbers. Now it's like everything's saved in my phone. I don't know. Sometimes I know my wife's number. Had to make sure I commit that one to memory just in case. But if we let chatbots or anything else think for us, we lessen our ability to think. It's the case with the ability, any ability you're mustering. Growing up, I learned French, and I was pretty fluent in it. And having not used it for about 10 years, anytime I engage someone in a conversation in French, one of the first things I say is, I can speak French, but I've forgotten a lot of words. I just warn them up front, like there's going to be times where what's that word? When Joanna and I visited the space exhibit at the Canada Aviation and Space Museum, it was fascinating to see the special equipment astronauts use to work out. With no gravity pulling on their bodies, and compressing things where they are used to being compressed. They had to adhere to strict workout routines in space with machines that help simulate gravity on their bodies. Otherwise, they would experience severe health issues. I always thought, being in space, how relaxing would that be? Too long. And it would create some issues. They had to have this fake gravity through these machines that treadmills and stuff. This all brings us back to the heart of what AI can never do. That which we were made to do. We were meant to grow in relationship with truth and wisdom. Proverbs 2, verse 6 says, "For the Lord gives wisdom." The Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. If Jesus is true and the Lord is the source of wisdom, if Jesus is true and the Lord is the source of wisdom, it is only in relationship with God that we can know reliable and eternal truth. John 8:31-32 says that to the Jews who had believed him, Jesus said, if you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth set you